So for everybody hanging out on stream, huge thanks to everybody coming and helping out. We are pushing for we're applying for partner February 1st. If we don't get it, it won't be the first time we haven't gotten it. We'll apply again on March 1st. So everybody coming and hanging out and lurk forcing it up. That's been a ton of fun. All the chatting and now there's all this like betting and all that. You have seen me doing something called vendor shuffling. And I wanted to talk about what a shuffle is, where it might exist in 14, where it does exist in World of Warcraft, why it exists, what it solves, why it's good, why it's bad, a little bit about what shuffling is for professions. So in a market, there are many times there is a good being generated. And in MMOs, it's something that drops from content that we're doing otherwise, dropping for content that's fun, or it's an easy way to do something that you feel like is going to sell on the market, on the auction house, on the market board, for a decent chunk of money. You can get it at a decent clip, and it's reliable gold per hour. And what ends up happening is inevitably there are goods that hit the market and they outpace demand. Supply and demand dictates that as supply rises and demand doesn't keep up, that the price falls. And in theory, what that does is that increases demand. The problem is that we have two forms of demand. We have static and we have elastic demand. And there is demand out there that is frozen and it won't adjust and it won't respect that. It's going to buy what it's going to buy. And that's, in the real world, that's things like healthcare, right? Price doesn't dictate whether or not we will use healthcare. And then you have things where it will flex, right? This is things like a box of cereal. If a box of cereal is $23, people would stop buying cereal. If a box of cereal was 50 cents, more people would eat cereal. And so it finds a happy medium somewhere in between. And in games, it is no different, except nobody here needs their money. There is no mortgage payment or rent payment. There is no food. There is no healthcare costs. If you log out and you just don't feed your character or log into them, they don't die like a little Tamagotchi or anything. You just log back in and your money's waiting. And housing, when you buy it in games like Final Fantasy XIV, when you build your garrison in World of Warcraft, it doesn't have upkeep. It doesn't matter. It just lives in a sustained state. You don't have to feed your mounts, your pets, none of that. So there isn't these ongoing upkeep costs, and so money therefore is it's used for things that you don't technically need, and it's used as a currency with which to barter with other players for things they've got. And things also don't decay. You bake a loaf of bread on a cooking or a culinarian type class, right? You craft it up out of wheat, and then you hold onto that bread for 5 years, and then you list it on the market board. It's still fresh bread. Things just don't break. Armor can be repaired an unlimited number of times. It doesn't eventually deteriorate into nothing. And so there isn't this endless hunger that happens here in the real world where, things can break down and things can be gone forever, and that just doesn't happen. And so supply inevitably outpaces demand. It does. And it can outpace it to a point where there is no amount of demand that can increase to catch up with supply, and so it drops down. So the first thing that games install is what's called a vendor price. Vendor prices are a price floor. It is the lowest that an item should ever go. It should never be worth less than that, because at that point, a vendor, an NPC, will purchase that item off of you an unlimited number of times. But usually it's just junk money. It's the very bottom of the barrel price that item should ever be traded for. It's effectively that item, while it did have a use, has become vendor trash. It's become a gray item. It's become something that you just vendor to clear your inventory. And some items stay that way forever. Some just cross that point. And in some cases, you see on the auction house or the market board, people will list it below that. Listing at or below vendor price doesn't make any sense on a base level. You are giving the auction house or market board a cut of a good so that you can wait to see if somebody will buy it, in hopes for a price that, remember, you're already giving up a cut of, that at its full price, if they did not take a cut, would only get you what you could get by clicking on a vendor right from the get-go. In World of Warcraft, you can have mounts with vendors on it, so you could do it there faster. You're making an extra trip. You're possibly mailing it to a bank tune, so you're paying gold to 30 copper per item, per stack, whatever, to send it off to this this character for the right to pay a deposit to list it on a market board to make less money than you'd make by just selling it to a vendor and being done with it. In Final Fantasy, your retainer can actually right-click sell items right from the sell screen. So you can actually sell it right from the market board, right there on the retainer. There is no reason to do this. You could instead, of course, go to things like Dome and Enclave, where you have an NPC that will pay you for a limited number of items each week above the amount of gil that you should get in World of Warcraft. There are ways to destroy items. You have things like desynth, milling, and all of that certain items can be broken down, and from there, that is where things should go. Now, as we start to talk about turning them into something else, that is where shuffling, that arbitrage comes from, that idea that I'm going to take something and I'm going to turn it into something else, and there is somebody over here willing to consume this at this price. There is an active market over here at this price, and over here there's this excess of this good where people are dumping it, and by marrying them together, there's profit. That's an inefficiency in the system. This buyer doesn't know to look for this seller, or they don't have that capability of transitioning it, and that is where a shuffle is born. The idea that I will take item A, I will turn it into item B, and it will have more value to a vendor or to another player. This is often done with crafting professions, where we buy up materials from gatherers, we turn them into items that are maybe wearable as gear or something like that, and then we sell it to players who are looking for gear, and we pocket any difference in between. It should technically always be done as a profit, because crafting professions are something that takes time. So even if it takes 2 seconds to craft, you can only craft 1,800 times per hour. You should be able to sell 18 hours or 1,800 items for some amount of profit over the raw material costs that you are able to pay for the hour that you gave up crafting. That is the case, but because crafting jobs require leveling and people want the experience, they'll go below. Because people feel that if they gather the materials for themselves, they're free, they'll go below. And so there are many times that the item is actually being devalued, and that item is not free. If you had gathered it, stopped there, listed the item raw, and gotten 1,000 gold or gil, and instead you take time out of your day to craft into an item and list that same amount of materials effectively for 500 gil or gold, you are losing money on potential value. You could have made 1,000 and done less. So you did not get that item for free. You got that item in whatever method by which you gathered it. That took your time, and that time was valued at a rate of 1,000 per item. And now instead, due to extra work on your part, extra item management, you have found a way to only get 500 for it. That's not good. That's just, and the reason you might do it might be because you have fun doing the middle step. The middle step gives you experience. The middle step gives you an achievement. The middle step honestly helps it sell faster. Maybe these 500 over here, I can sell 20 of those a day, and these 1,000s, I can only sell one a day. And I've got a bunch. So some I'm going to convert into 500, some I'm going to sell at 1,000, because I want to be able to take advantage of both markets, increase the total amount of demand, and that allows me to go out and gather more. Because if I gather a bunch and I can only sell one per day, it's going to take me a lot of days to get through my big pile. But if I convert some of those into something cheaper, that is a good reason to shuffle for a loss. A common set of shuffles is dust shuffles in World of Warcraft, where you actually shuffle green items, either that you purchase or that you craft from raw materials, to an enchanter. The enchanter actually disenchants them for dust and then sells those either as raw enchanting materials or as enchants themselves. Once again, it doesn't matter. The 1,000 or 500, 1,000 or 500, doesn't matter which way it is. Many times if you're doing a massive number of shuffles, you need to do both just to get it off your hands. And so that is how that works. In Final Fantasy, a similar thing would be desynthesis. There's your ability to destroy any item into the game, kind of. Most of the items in the game for basically what they would be made of, even if they're a dungeon drop. If it's an iron chest plate, it'll drop maybe an iron ingot. And so a common one that you might do is you might buy fish, which are often sold at below vendor price for God knows why, and you're going to break that down, and you're going to get usually sand, which is total garbage. Toss it in the trash. Vendor it. Please don't try to sell it. It's just a waste of a retainer slot. And you're going to get a water crystal, water cluster, something like that, and that is oftentimes worth more than the fish you may have put in there. You have to kind of get to know those drop rates and the rate at which you buy fish to know if that really works out, but you can auto descent the whole stack, and then you can do that, and that results in a shuffle. And here is where vendor shuffles actually enter. Vendor shuffles are unique because now you're no longer selling that new item on the very market board that you may have acquired the items you used in step A, but you actually are selling to an NPC. So you are buying up, let's say, 2 pieces of fabric. You're crafting that fabric into a nice fancy shirt, and that shirt is now worth more to a vendor than the 2 pieces of cloth cost you. And you were in trade for the time it took you to buy it up, craft it, and vendor it. You are making whatever that delta is. And in World of Warcraft, the thing that is on the top of my screen when I'm streaming, what I've been doing most often recently is working my way through a pile of 250, 260,000 shrouded cloth. And the way I've been doing that is I'm taking 4 cloth, 4 vendor bought thread, and I'm turning that into a cloak. I'm selling that cloak for more than the thread plus the cloth cost me, and I'm pocketing the very small difference. But it's kind of like they talk about in Office Space. It is a very small amount of money, but I'm taking that penny not just once, not just twice, but hundreds of times, and I'm taking it over and over and over again. I'm just going to keep pulling. I'm going to keep pulling those pennies, and they add up. They add up, especially when you're mostly focused on another game, which on the side of me, I'm usually playing Final Fantasy, and so I've been crafting in Final Fantasy. That takes a little more focus, and then I've been doing vendor shuffles in World of Warcraft at the same time, because those two things put together keeps me relatively active while streaming. That's what I've been doing a lot of, and the vendor shuffle, it's not good money compared to any active farm in the game. You could run dungeons for more money, you could gather for more money, you could craft actual things that players want for more money, you could go farm transmog for more money. You could probably go capture pets and train those up and make more money per hour. There are so many things, but it's pretty good money for the fact that all I do is say craft all, and it crafts till my inventory is full, stops. I open up a vendor. I have vendor as vendor is the name of the add-on I have installed, and it is set to whitelist to vendor all of the variations of cloak that it can make. As soon as I open it up, it automatically begins vendoring cloaks. And now we have 110 cloaks or whatever's in my inventory done, and then I press craft all and we go again. And when I run out of materials, I open up my mailbox where I have mailed myself thousands and thousands of cloth and thousands of thread from a character that has exalted rep, because my tailor does not. And it's cheaper that way. And I do it again, and I do it again, and I do it again. And every 4 to 6 minutes, depending on how big my inventory is at the time, because it has cloth and thread in it, I get to vendor another round, and that other round gets me 4,000-ish gross money, but total net profit of a very small number, enough that I basically ran a daily quest over 6 or 12 or 20 minutes. It doesn't really matter because I was mostly just watching it. Every 2 seconds, it's just crafting a cloak for the world's smallest amount of profit. And so that's how a vendor shuffle works. Now, are vendor shuffles healthy? Absolutely not. Vendor shuffles are a sign that there is something that is being generated at a rate faster than anything can do anything about it. But the alternative is to let that item die altogether and become vendor trash. And in my mind, I would prefer that players are the ones that ultimately derive the value from an item before it hits the garbage heap than being generated off of a kill into a bag directly to vendor. I prefer that there's a player transaction in there, and that's where vendor shuffles take place. They are the last stop for something to keep it from just going directly from gotten in the wild to garbage heap. And so they are something that can set it dynamically. If anything, I would prefer that there was a more dynamic use. I love enchanting shuffles. I think that they're a healthy way of allowing one market, right? People who need enchanting mats to get enchanting mats at a rate that the market maybe can't generate on its own, just naturally from disenchanting only dungeon drops. And it allows them to generate the massive amounts of that they need. And then in trade, people who find all this cloth and don't know what to do with it. And then there's a middleman. And the lower that price of cloth goes, the more the middleman makes, which is great because when it's a break even, there's 1, 2, maybe 3 morons like me that are willing to do it for a very small profit per hour. But as the market gets further and further out of whack, as the price of, let's say, a dust or an essence gets further and further up within enchanting mats, and as cloth goes lower and lower and lower, it's a higher and higher profit margin. And when it hits 10,000 gold per hour, 15,000 gold per hour, 20,000 gold per hour, you may see more and more people going, you know what? I'd be willing to do that while watching a movie. And so it allows players to decide where that fair point is. How much cloth is a dust worth, right? Not how much are they actually both worth vendor price, not how many cloth become a dust. How many cloth do I need to be able to buy to turn into dust where I'm willing to do it for that middle amount, that profit? How much meat needs to be left on the bone there before I'm willing to hop into the mix and help turn that cloth into dust? I think shuffles are very interesting. It's not something 14's done a great job with, and it's maybe not been a goal of theirs. It ends up meaning that their market board suffers from rapidly falling prices on pretty much every item in the game as people have more and more and more. They have my monitor meant sleep. More and more of the of items and more gil in the game, but then there's less and less need for every item all the time as it ages out, and so things continually fall in price. They occasionally get a brief surge when you have something like materia being needed for a new raid tier, etc. Something like Ishcord Restoration causes weird spikes in it, but those are short term, and when that event ends, it will go back to its slow and steady decline into vendorness. Just total garbage, never used by anybody. And that's really disappointing, the fact that something can't be used. One of the mechanics that World of Warcraft had in BFA that I really liked was every fish in BFA could be ground into fish oil, and fish oil was a material used in cooking, and so the lowest price fish set the price of fish oil. And so I really like that, you start to create something where the market gets to decide when something's done going down. The market gets to decide when something's a fair price. And you can have vendor as a floor, but I'd really prefer we don't stay anywhere near that floor, and that the entire player economy is something that happens with each other. It's something that goes back and forth. It's something that I think Ishgard has done really well with. It's been really fun to kind of see people getting out there and gathering and all of this, but then when that ends, what happens to all these items? What happens to everything that people have been gathering in Diadem? Do they just slowly plummet into the ground? It's something that World Visit makes really interesting because you can buy from multiple servers. So I was hopping around servers today and buying up low price stuff. I stockpiled too much of a few things, and then when I was done with them, I could sell them on my server for a profit. That helps people on my server buy at a little bit lower price. They're of course very happy. The people that I bought from got full value for what they asked for, didn't have to relist it at a lower price. They're of course very happy, and I pocket the delta, so I'm of course very happy. And so that kind of arbitrage, you're creating balance in the system. Now my role only exists for as long as the inefficiency exists. So when World of Warcraft in 8.3 pushed out their auction house revamp, they actually removed that altogether. They moved to a commodity board where many of the tidy stacking and things like that were acting as a form of middleman, they got removed from the system. So when the inefficiency got solved, when the glitch got fixed, the paycheck stopped coming. And so I'm fine with that as well. Yoshi P has expressed in Final Fantasy about wanting to move to data center wide market boards. Can you imagine in World of Warcraft if we had an NA or a battle group wide auction house in every case? If there was just one auction house for all of NA, one auction house for all of EU, it'd be chaotic, and people who are used to running a market on their server would be pissed because they lose their advantage. But to everybody else that's at their mercy, the consumer would probably end up winning out. There would be more things available, and you'd never list something and be like, well, my server isn't consuming deviate leather right now, so it's not worth anything. That's fine. Is anyone on North America consuming deviate leather right now? Is any Horde player anywhere doing deviate leather right now? If so, mine has value. And so it would create a more honest way of bringing together buyer and seller. And there are going to be some people that are negatively impacted by it. There are going to be some people on servers that are farming up things that their server doesn't want. They're thrilled because they just got connected with a lot of buyers. There would be winners and losers in the short term, but over the long term, I think it would lead to healthier market conditions where you can't have hard monopolies unless somebody is even wealthier. And so I think just opening that up. I don't know that either game cares an immense amount about its economy. I think that it's quite notable that World of Warcraft did not mention economy as the driving factor with getting rid of multi-broadcasting software, when in my opinion that would be the most valid reason to get rid of multi-broadcasting. Final Fantasy continues to add things to the game that have introduce things like more materia, easier to get materia back. You can now materia extract from 100% spirit bond items without losing the item. They clearly are looking at major drivers of what gil is worth. Materia is a great gauge. Materia has just been driven into the ground because it's no longer being deleted as often. It's coming into play more often, and it's continually this thing, and players can only consume so much of it because they only let us overmeld to a certain degree. It's not like if I continue overmelding, I get a 0.1 increase, and that's for balance sake, but I'm just saying from an economy standpoint, they've done nothing to increase demand, but they've done a ton to increase supply. And so that clearly tells me that their goal is to get items into people's hands and let them play the game, not at all worried about what that does to the market board, to the economy. And so I think both games run perfectly successful games without caring about this. I just think it's a real bummer that there's an opportunity here for all that stupid economics we learned in grade school and high school and all that to actually mean something, to actually matter, to have a real market where your money actually has value, where it has a use, and where the items you find are going to be useful to someone and therefore have a value to the server as a whole. And then when you trade that for money, that money is acting as a bartering chip to things that someone else finds that generates value for you. And I think that the more games can get towards that, the more interesting that is. And I think we can get away from this rampant inflation. Quest givers give just all the gold, and there's raw gold farms, and there's vendor shuffles, and get to where people are generating items, which people use. It doesn't work in really small games because you don't have enough supply, but these games are well past that point. And I think understanding what shuffles is just helps me understand where I think the game has inefficiencies. In the meantime, the best thing that can happen is people do shuffles to help it along, but that's somebody putting a band-aid on a problem that ideally wouldn't exist in the first place. So that's why I do shuffles. That is what they are. I'm interested in seeing if some of the shuffles with some of the new recent decent changes and things like that are more viable than they have been in the past when I've given them a shot. I've tried making videos on them, and then every time I test them out, they don't do well. I've thought about making the videos anyway, and I don't. So, how to make just 100 gil per hour. Or in some cases, I go buy 1,000,000 gil worth of something, and it's how to lose 700,000 gil in 2 hours. And it just doesn't work out. So I've gone down these roads to test drop rates and things before, and it's not worked out for me in the past. It'd be interesting to see if a shuffle is something that can help along certain markets. Fish, for example, is a market that it's really hard to sell fish regularly, but water clusters might be something that people are actually using. So I wonder if there's a market there where I can become a steady supplier of water clusters at a rate that benefits me, benefits people buying clusters, benefits people selling fish. So hopefully you guys find this interesting. Hopefully a little more of a glimpse into how these games handle underlying economic systems is better. They both have inefficiencies with it. They both have weird relationships with their crafters and gatherers who are drastically different than each other. And I think that there's something interesting to be said for allowing shuffles in the game, but understanding why they're there. And instead of nerfing them into the ground with nerfing vendor rates or adding extremely expensive vendor materials to things that you can just statically adjust it out, just nerf it out of existence, why not say it takes twice as much of the materials from the market and let the market nerf it out of existence? That way it's always there if the market starts to have a really big crash. Let it be there as a dynamic last stop before vendoring becomes the sad death of brand new shiny items that we work so hard to get. Hopefully you guys found this interesting. It wasn't really about anything in particular, but it was about gaming, kinda.